Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Jules and today is Friday, the 9th of September 2011. Today we have English writer and philosophical thinker Neil Kramer. For over 20 years, Neil has independently studied philosophy, psychology, shamanism, indigenous wisdom traditions, inner alchemy, occultism, and esoteric world history. Neil's website is neilkramer.com. Hi Neil, and welcome to the WebBot Forum Roundtable.
Hey Jules, hey guys, good to be here and thanks for having me.
Thank you for visiting with us. The WebBot Forum administrator and producer of the show is Fox, and he'll be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us tonight. They include members Chipperdog, Gemini, Paul Muir, Peace for Gaia, and Uranus Rising. For listeners, this interview will assume you have a good understanding of Neil's work, which includes his numerous articles and interviews, including his last interview on Veritas. Neil's website again is neilkramer.com. The interview will be available on YouTube for free on the WebBot Forum channel and at the website webbotforum.com. Neil, are you comfortable and ready for the interview, sir?
I am ready to rock.
Fantastic. The first question we have for you, Neil, is when TMRN interviewed Carl Kellerman, he mentioned that enlightenment manifests as chaos. Your description between machine culture and human culture reminded me of the differences between the left brain and the right brain. Also, interestingly, you define human culture as being spontaneous and asymmetrical, which tend to lead to chaos or disorganization. Is the manifesting speed of events and chaotic times a sign that humans are awakening and becoming more enlightened?
Yes, I think it is. I think that there's no question that if people take a look at their own lives and the things that characterize our lives, like our relationships and our jobs, our friendships, our resources, our feelings, etc., the real hands-on felt stuff, that's changing for most people I communicate with, whether it's on a conscious level or a mainstream level. It seems to cross both boundaries, and there is definitely something that reaches into the interior and is also exhibited pretty strongly in the exterior. So whether you're talking about political events or whether you're talking about galactic events and alignments and comics and solar activity and so on, those things, in my understanding, have quite a close relationship. So the old Hermetic, saying as above, so below, that originally came from the Emerald Tablet, that is very much the case here. And very often, I think that the sign that that's occurring is that there is a correlation between what you see in the news, whether that's through your screen on your computer or the television or the newspaper, and what's occurring in your own domestic life. So I'm very much a sort of proponent of not separating out one's domestic arrangements and scenarios and concerns with what goes on a more phenomenal and incredible and universal level. I like to draw people pretty close together with those things, and I think there is a distinct link between the two. And specifically, as you sort of quote me there, that the asymmetrical nature of human culture, as that arises, it offsets in a positive way, and it upsets in a negative way the symmetrical mainstream culture, which is all based on order and routine and pattern and repetitiveness. And although we all might kind of nod and say, well, yeah, that system potentially has been pretty heavily compromised and it's time for something else, because it reaches into our daily lives, it's quite uncomfortable for a lot of people, and they're not sure what to do about it, because it does put question marks on what you're going to be doing in a month's time, never mind 10 years' time. And, is the basic resources, the basic human necessities, are they going to be met? So it forces a very interesting question on us, which is, can we operate and can we philosophize and can we thrive in a perspective that isn't absolutely anchored in self, basically? Because that's the thing that is put under pressure when the spiral of the old system begins to fall in on itself. We have to look at our own resources, of course, because we still need to eat, breathe, and walk around and do stuff. but it forces a philosophical perspective onto the most ordinary of people, quite frankly. So, yes, I think that the speed of events is undeniable, and you can look at Kalaman's formulation of the sort of Mayan temple structures and the different orders of consciousness that may represent, from the galactic to the human and the microbe and the social orders and all these different sets of data that you can represent that with. And yeah, again, bring it into your own life, into your own hands. You can kind of feel it and you can kind of see it. And although you might have been able to talk about this a decade ago, it's very obvious now, and that can be seen in the changes in people's lives, quite frankly. So yeah, I would say that speeding up is a sign of awakening. It's not the sign, but it's one of the sets of statistics that you can kind of map against human consciousness naturally and organically beginning to stretch its limbs.
Okay, thank you. The increasing frequency of events happening around us seems to correlate with Terence McKenna's eschaton, which you've mentioned slightly as well. Some researchers think that it is the human awakening and our increase in frequency that is causing chaos and changes to our external world. Example, changes in the sun is because of changes to us. Others think it is the other way around, and that an external energy is increasing our frequency, such as energies from the center of the galaxy or the move from the Piscean into the Aquarian age. Which camp do you fall in, and are we causing these changes in society, Earth, solar system, etc., or are we being changed?
I think, unsurprisingly, the answer is both, really. So I'm not in either camp, but each point that is made is a relevant one, and you can't deny that there's certain cosmic rays emanating from the galactic center that physically change things and physically change the wave or particulate structure of what we're composed of. So our energetic configuration is undoubtedly influenced by that, and it would be foolish to say otherwise. The thing that's more challenging is the flip side of that, to say that a lot of things that occur in the solar system and the wider galaxy out into interstellar space are affected and influenced by us as conscious humans. For a lot of people, certainly in the mainstream, of course, that is a bit of a stretch, quite frankly. They can't see how that would occur. And the way I approach that is really to say that we're not just little objects placed in the world. We're actually very much something that arises out of the world. So we're here as part of the ecosystem, just as trees are, just as the oceans are, just as the suns are, just as everything is. But what's unusual about human beings, certainly within our perspective as three-dimensional entities, is that we have this peculiar quality of reflective consciousness, of self-referential consciousness, and of the ability to model dynamics, model ideas, and model reality conceptually with our imagination, which is relatively unique as we currently understand that to work amongst the other life forms and entities in this mainstream 3D world. As you begin to broaden out from that, of course, you could say, well, there's a lot of mystical traditions that recognize lots of other life forms, some of them far more advanced than Homo sapiens. And also the other side of that is that the things that we don't necessarily associate with consciousness, like the rocks and the water and the ground and the grass, that indeed does have a very specific and a very real momentum with its own consciousness. And I would describe that as, first density and second density and third density consciousness, which I think perhaps we're going to come to a little bit later. But certainly the question is very much wrapped in the idea that it's my conception of that, which I've kind of talked about in conferences recently, and also is going to be kind of unpacked in a lot of detail in my forthcoming book, is this 7-dimensional model, and that each conscious entity basically has an ascend movement from the first to the seventh. And it's kind of a journey, basically, and it's a journey to map that. And to a very real extent, the beginning of understanding how this relates to external phenomena And if, chaos and change and galactic frequencies are relevant or not, is to understand that we're not just operating in that third density, that third dimensional space. That's not the only place we operate on. So there is a reach into what you might say a fourth density state or a higher state of consciousness, as well as the preceding ones. So it's important, I think, to understand that as you move through those dimensional spaces, you encompass all the preceding ones. So we have conscious dominion in a natural sense, not in a hierarchical sense, but in a natural sense, conscious inclusiveness of the second and first dimensional spaces. And as we transit naturally into that fourth dimensional space, there is a great deal of energy required for that, and there is a great deal of metamorphosis that is undergone, as indeed, as you say, as Kalman and McKenna and other commentators have discussed at length. And quite frankly, I think it's quite a normal process. What's unusual is that it only happens very occasionally at great intervals of time, so it's unusual to be around when that happens. And as you approach that transition point, which is a curve on a graph, it's not a light switch moment, it's something that happens over time, relatively quickly, years rather than decades or centuries, that is. But as you approach that, you begin to see the extreme separation between the old outmoded systems that don't really serve us very well and don't really function and aren't very human-centric, or should I say life-centric as a whole, and one's own arising of consciousness, one's own increase in the quality of how we perceive the world. And as you do that, you begin to see that extraordinary sort of disparity between the two, and it becomes almost unbearable. So whether you're sort of 25 or 65, I think people are starting to feel that stretch now. And that does represent, if you're an astrologer, a move from one age to another. If you're a Mayan scholar, a switch from one time frame to another, one calendar to another. And if you prefer to map it in religious terms, it is the end of an age. It is something that would be fairly classified as an apocalypse. That is just the unveiling at the end of an age. And the unveiling sheds light on what didn't work so well in the previous age. So there is a learning process. So there's kind of like a moral to the tale. And no better way to learn it than to be plunged into the thick of it right as we are, inescapably put into this body. And we're here. And, of course, many people feel that we choose to be here. And it's a sacred experience. It's a precious experience. And there's no substitute for it. You can't look at this from a screen somewhere in the galaxy. You can't holographically do this. You have to actually be committed to it and invested in it. And I think that's the purpose of this flow, is to be thrown right into the transition point. So it is a fascinating time to observe this and collectively